My name is Clarissa Litton. For the past 35 years, I have quietly built an empire from a small antique shop in New Orleans into a chain of upscale vintage design boutiques scattered across the country. No investor, no co-founder, just sweat, silence, and strategy. I've been featured in business magazines, invited to speak at women's leadership conferences, and had a Forbes columnist once call me the matriarch of aesthetic power. But all of that pales compared to the betrayal I would face, not from a stranger, not from a rival, but from the woman my son called his wife. You might think this story is about business. It's not. It's about what happens when family forgets that the hands that built their world could also let it all crumble. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now let me tell you how it all began. It started with a bouquet of lilies, my favorite, delivered to my estate on the morning of my son Adam's wedding. A handwritten note on embossed cardstock. To the most beautiful woman I've ever known. Signed by Marcus. My son's name is Adam. My ex-husband's name long dead is Thomas. So who the hell was Marcus? I tucked the card inside my purse without a word. I smiled through champagne toasts, danced to Sinatra, and even stood beside my new daughter-in-law for a few photos in front of the ivy wall. Her name was Natalie, a lovely girl on the surface. The kind that reads Vogue but not Dostoevsky. The kind that calls handmade soap rustic and my decades of taste cute. I didn't mind. I had made peace with the generational divide. I didn't expect her to understand the weight of mahogany wood or the poetry in a vintage Dior cut. But I did expect her to understand respect. Natalie had been dating Adam for 3 years. I kept a comfortable distance, attending the holidays, sending thoughtful gifts, never interfering. I believed a woman should let her son build his own life. But I also believed that any woman who steps into a family inherits its weight, its grace, and its debts. Natalie smiled wide at the altar, dripping in diamonds. Not heirlooms, mind you. Her parents insisted on new. The irony didn't strike me until months later, when I would learn how many things in Natalie's life were borrowed from her personality to her promises. The wedding itself was grand. A white-tented affair on the cliffs of Monterey, the kind of wedding where drones fly above for footage and champagne flows before noon. Natalie's parents, new money oil investors from Dallas, loved the spectacle. My son Adam looked happy, bewitched maybe, but happy. I spent most of the evening observing, a habit I learned from years running a business. You don't interrupt the room, you read it. And what I read in Natalie was this: something too polished, too perfect, too performed. Her gaze darted too quickly, her laughter came half a second too late. But I brushed it off. Maybe she was nervous. Maybe I was cynical. Then came the first mistake. 2 weeks after the honeymoon, I received an email from a supplier in Italy confirming a shipment of vintage rugs to a warehouse address. I didn't recognize an address under the same LLC my son and I shared for family holdings. I called Adam. Must be some error, he mumbled. Natalie's been handling some paperwork. Paperwork? Since when did Natalie have access to our corporate files? She's helping organize the books. You always said I needed to learn. Learn, yes. Hand over, no. That night, I logged into the system. Passwords had been changed. Access privileges altered. My name removed from 3 of the 5 asset folders. I stared at the screen for over an hour, unmoving. And then I remembered the lilies. Marcus. Suddenly the scent returned to my memory like a ghost. Lilies. Guilt? Secrets. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I printed the audit logs, highlighted the transfers, and made a cup of Earl Grey. If Natalie thought she had entered a game, she had no idea the opponent across the board had built kingdoms out of silence. The next morning, I did not call Adam. I did not confront Natalie. Instead, I called my estate lawyer, Benjamin Armitage. Ben and I had worked together for over 20 years. He knew every clause in my will, every asset held under trust, every shell company I used for property investments. He also knew how I moved quietly, thoroughly, without warning. You want a full forensic review? He asked once I forwarded the documents. Yes, I replied. And discreetly, I want to know exactly what she's touched. He didn't ask who she was. He'd met Natalie once and seen enough. By the end of the week, Ben had compiled a report thick enough to make a banker sweat. Natalie had not only accessed the family LLC, she'd funneled funds into a real estate venture registered in her maiden name. The signature on the paperwork, sloppily forged. Not mine. But my son's name co-signed it, which made things legally murky and emotionally worse. Adam had always been trusting. He inherited his father's charm, but little of my skepticism. I could forgive naivete, but negligence, that was harder to swallow. I needed clarity. So I went to see Natalie. She greeted me in a white cashmere wrap holding a green juice. The kind of drink that screams wellness but tastes like a lawn. "Oh, Clarissa, we weren't expecting you," she said, flashing that polished smile. "I don't schedule war," I replied, stepping past her into the living room. The apartment was beautifully staged, faux art sleek furniture, and not a single book out of place. It looked like a magazine spread. Or a lie. "I'll make this brief," I said. "You've been moving money." She blinked, then tilted her head like a bird pretending it doesn't see the cat. "I don't know what you mean," she said sweetly. I handed her a folder, Ben's report printed and bound. Her smile faltered. I watched her flip through the pages, her fingers trembling slightly at the notarized account statements. "You accessed my accounts, Natalie. You used Adam's sign-in. You diverted funds into a shell company that lists you as managing partner. That's fraud." Her eyes narrowed. "You think I did this alone?" "I think you orchestrated it," I said calmly. "And if Adam helped, he's more fool than fraud." She threw the folder onto the glass table with a thud. "You're just bitter because you can't control him anymore." There it was. Control. What these younger women never understand is that our generation didn't fight for power. We built it, brick by brick. Not by charm, not by hashtags, but by learning every loophole in the system and staying 2 steps ahead. I leaned forward. "You should be very careful with your next words, Natalie." She laughed bitterly. "Or what? You'll cut me off." I smiled. "Oh, darling, I already have." I stood, buttoned my coat, and turned toward the door. "Oh, and Natalie," I added without looking back, "the flowers from Marcus were lovely. Next time, tell him not to use scented paper. It lingers." I didn't wait for her reaction. That night, I updated my will. Adam would remain a beneficiary, of course. But everything, every dollar, every key to every property would be transferred into an irrevocable trust under my maiden name. And Natalie, her name would never appear on any of it again. I slept well that night. The first deep sleep in weeks. Because I knew I wasn't finished. Not yet. She had tried to take what I built. Now I would show her what legacy really means. The next morning, I opened the safe deposit box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were handwritten ledgers, hard copies of trust deeds, old titles in my maiden name, Clarissa Lowell, a name that Natalie never once asked about, nor cared to know. It made me think. She never saw me, only what I represented, a wealthy matriarch, an obstacle to outlive. I sat at my writing desk with a cup of Earl Grey, scanning each document like a detective revisiting an old case. I underlined, I circled, I noted dates. It wasn't revenge. It was a reclamation. Later that day, Ben called. "We've begun transferring your liquid assets into a new trust, Clarissa. Everything is shielded. The real estate will follow within the week." "And the clause I requested?" I asked. He chuckled dryly. "It's ironclad. Anyone attempting to challenge the trust forfeits their rights immediately, including your son if he defends her." "Good," I said quietly. "It's time they all learned that silence isn't surrender." That evening, I attended a fundraiser I helped found 20 years ago. My presence was symbolic: pearls, polished heels, and a crimson silk scarf tied just right. I wasn't there to network. I was there to signal. Natalie was also there. She came dressed in a gown that cost more than her conscience and clung to Adam's arm like a trophy he hadn't earned. She saw me across the room and smiled. But I didn't smile back. I didn't need to. 2 board members greeted me warmly, praising my recent donation. I let them speak within earshot of her. Let her hear phrases like 7 figures legacy haul, and in Clarissa's name. She couldn't hide the twitch in her perfectly Botoxed cheek. Later that week, my housekeeper Rosa, who had been with me for over 15 years, brought me a package. Delivered by hand, ma'am. No return address. Inside was a letter from Natalie. It wasn't an apology. It was a veiled threat. She wrote, "If you continue this, it won't just ruin Adam's reputation. The press might dig into your past. You wouldn't want old names resurfacing, would you?" I smiled bitterly. She thought she'd found a crack. That crack was called my first husband, Peter Lowell, a scandalous man who cheated on me with every intern he hired and left me with nothing but a name. What she didn't know was that that name had power. Because after the divorce, I took what I learned, rebuilt everything, and used that very name to shield my assets from vultures like her. She had no idea that every property she stepped into had been signed under Clarissa Lowell, not Clarissa Huntley. I called Ben again. "Send her a reply," I said. "Brief. Legal. What should it say?" I thought for a moment. "Tell her, defamation is a dangerous game, especially when you're already losing." "Shh." Ben chuckled. "Elegant. Cutting. Classic you." But this wasn't over. I had one final card to play, and it would be dealt at the family estate dinner next week. A dinner I would fund, cater, host, and destroy all at once. Because Natalie had mistaken money for leverage. But in my world, leverage isn't money. It's control of the narrative. And I was about to flip the entire script. I spent the following days in calculated quiet. My home hummed with the subtle rhythms of war prep silver being polished. Place cards calligraphed a new centerpiece commissioned from the florist, downtown lilies and orchids twined like truth and vengeance. There was no shouting, no drama, only control, precision. The family estate dinner had always been my late husband's tradition. Even after his death, I continued it in his honor, hosting it every year on the first Sunday of October. A gathering meant for gratitude, respect, continuity. That was before Natalie turned it into theater. She had recently started inserting herself into its planning, replacing traditional elements with her glossy vision of modern hospitality. Vegan appetizers, influencer-worthy decor menu cards with her and Adam's names embossed at the bottom like co-hosts. I let her, for a time, but this year was different. This year, I reserved the estate in my name. I coordinated the staff, the catering, even the guest list. Natalie didn't know because she hadn't bothered to check. Adam assumed, as always, that things would simply go on as usual. They were about to learn what unusual looked like. The morning of the dinner, I awoke early and dressed with care. Dark emerald velvet, a brooch that once belonged to my grandmother. I wasn't going to battle. I was going to preside. As guests arrived, Natalie floated about like a crownless queen. Her voice rang out with false laughter. Her dress clung like it needed approval. I stood near the grand piano waiting for the moment. It came during the toast. Adam tapped his glass. "We want to thank everyone for coming, especially our wonderful mother Clarissa, for always bringing this family together." Natalie smiled, lifting her glass a second too early. I didn't lift mine. Instead, I stepped forward. "Before we toast," I said, "I have something to share." A soft murmur moved through the crowd. I held up a slim envelope. "This is a revised copy of my estate plan, effective immediately. A few of you might want to pay attention." Natalie blinked. "This document states," I continued, "that anyone who attempts to undermine, manipulate, or betray the moral integrity of this family by way of deceit, infidelity, or coercion will be disqualified from inheriting any portion of my assets. That includes spousal claims and indirect beneficiaries." Adam shifted in his seat. I didn't blink. "And to clarify, I added this clause has already been enacted." Natalie's hand slowly lowered her glass. Her smile cracked. I placed the envelope on the table unopened. "Ben will distribute personal letters to each of you outlining your updated status." It was then the murmurs turned to silence. Evelyn, my niece, looked down, visibly uncomfortable. My brother-in-law coughed into his napkin. Only Rosa, standing quietly near the hallway entrance, met my eyes with calm understanding. Natalie stood up. "What is this? A public spectacle. How dare you accuse me of—" "I didn't accuse you of anything," I said softly. "Your texts did." Her face paled. "Excuse me." Adam finally found his voice. "Check her phone," I said, and turned to the guests. "Check the texts she sent to someone saved as Studio Pilates." And then ask yourselves how a woman who claimed to be at yoga 5 days a week somehow managed to rack up hotel charges at the Camellia Suites. Natalie's hands trembled. Clarissa, you've always hated me, she hissed. No, I replied. I ignored you. That was my mistake. I walked out after that. No raised voice. No drama. Just a quiet exit and a legacy reset. Later that night, Ben called. They're spinning, he said. Adam is in shock. Natalie tried calling me twice. Block her, I said, politely, and I poured myself a glass of wine. Justice didn't always need a gavel. Sometimes it just needed timing, and a room full of silence. The fallout was slow and searing. The next morning, the group chat was unusually quiet. No thank you for last night messages. No blurry selfies of dessert plates. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes you lean in and listen harder. The kind that meant I had finally taken back control. Adam didn't call. Natalie did once. I let it ring. But the real surprise came that afternoon when Rosa showed up at my door. She looked relieved. I wanted to say thank you, she said softly. No one's ever stood up to her like that. Not even Adam. I stepped aside to let her in. I always thought you saw everything Rosa added but chose to stay quiet. I did, I admitted. And it cost me more than I realized. She took a seat, eyes scanning the walls of my study photos of Adam as a boy, the framed note from my late husband, the antique shelves lined with books and brass figurines from our travels. She made him cruel, Rosa whispered. And you, invisible. That word hit harder than I expected. Invisible. How many years had I made myself smaller just to keep the family from splintering? How many dinners had I smiled through while Natalie interrupted, talked over me, corrected my stories? How many times had I let Adam shrug off her comments because she didn't mean it that way? Too many. I'm going to start looking for a new place, Rosa said. I don't want to stay in that house anymore. You're welcome here, I told her. For as long as you need? She blinked, surprised. Really? Of course, I smiled. You're not just my daughter-in-law. You're family. She started to cry, then quietly, almost ashamed. I poured us tea. Later that week, my attorney confirmed the changes had been filed. Natalie was officially excluded from the will. Adam's share was placed in a discretionary trust accessible only under specific conditions. Rosa and my granddaughter Emma had their inheritances locked in untouchable by Adam or his wife. That night, a courier delivered an envelope to Adam's office. Inside was a printed photo. Natalie. Hotel hallway. A timestamp from 3 weeks ago. A man's hand brushing the small of her back. There was no note, no explanation, no signature. Just the image. Poetic, if you asked me. I knew it wouldn't make Adam call me, but it would make him think. 2 days later, Rosa moved in. She brought Emma with her, a small suitcase, her sketchbooks, and the stuffed llama I'd given her for her 4th birthday. We made her room upstairs, the one Adam used to sleep in as a boy. She picked new curtains. Rosa bought a lamp shaped like a cat. The house came alive in a way it hadn't for years. One night, while reading in bed, I heard Emma call from the hallway. Nana. Yes, sweetheart. I like it better here. I smiled in the dark. So do I. Natalie never responded to the final letter from my lawyer, but I knew she'd read it. I knew she'd fume, pace, throw things, and then realize it was over. There would be no second chances. Not this time. Not for someone who mistook kindness for weakness. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the hand behind the curtain, and I'd just pulled the strings. Adam came by unannounced one rainy Thursday. I opened the door to find him standing under a dripping umbrella, disheveled and damp, his eyes sunken and rimmed red. Can I come in? For a moment I considered saying no, but I stepped aside and let him pass. He didn't go to the living room or the kitchen. He walked straight to the study, the room he'd grown up tiptoeing through, the one with the tall windows and brass lamps where his father used to read. He sat in the armchair across from mine. I saw the letter he began. I nodded. And the photo? I said nothing. Adam looked away, jaw tightening. How long have you known? Long enough, I answered. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Why didn't you tell me? I almost laughed. Would you have believed me? His silence confirmed what we both knew. She said you hated her. He finally muttered. I didn't hate her. I saw her. He frowned. I saw the way she chipped away at you, made you doubt yourself. I saw how she smirked when I offered to help, then whispered behind my back. I saw her mold you into someone smaller, but I stayed silent, hoping you'd find your own way back. Adam buried his face in his hands. I feel like a fool. You are in love, I said gently, and she knew exactly how to use that. He looked up. She's threatening to fight the will. She won't win, I said calmly. There's evidence, affidavits, bank statements. He blinked. You planned this. No, I replied. But I prepared. He leaned back, exhaling. I lost everything. I stood and walked to the bookshelf, pulling down a dusty envelope. I handed it to him. Inside was a letter, his father's handwriting yellowed but bold. Adam read it in silence. I watched his face change with each line. When he was done, he asked, "Why give me this now?" "Because your father believed in you," I said. "And so do I. But I needed you to hit bottom before you remembered who you were." He looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "This house. It's yours, right?" "In my maiden name," I confirmed. "Paid in full before your wedding." He shook his head in disbelief. "So Natalie, she never stood a chance at it." I smiled faintly. "She only thought she did." A long pause. "I want to start over," Adam said. "Then do it," I replied. "With Rosa. Only if you're honest," I said. "With her. With Emma. With yourself." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I've missed this room," he whispered. "You can visit," I smiled. "But you don't live here anymore." He chuckled through the tears. "Fair?" I walked him to the door. He turned before leaving. "Do you forgive me?" I met his gaze. "I never stopped loving you." And then I closed the door behind him. Rosa stepped out from the hallway. She had heard everything. She didn't speak, but I saw the gratitude in her eyes. Emma peeked from behind her leg. "Is Daddy staying for dinner?" "Not tonight," Rosa said, brushing the girl's hair back. And in that simple answer there was peace. I thought things might quiet down after that. But healing, it turns out, isn't silent. It hums in little moments, Emma's giggles echoing through the hallway, Rosa singing while folding laundry, the sound of my own laughter returning after years of absence. It was messy, beautiful, unexpected. And just when I thought it had settled, the phone rang. "Mrs. Grayson." "Yes, this is Benjamin Clay. I represent Natalie Carter." I paused. "Go on." "She intends to file a formal dispute against your estate, claiming undue influence, mental coercion, and breach of familial trust." I almost laughed. "She wants to sue me for writing her out of something she was never entitled to." "I'm simply relaying the message, ma'am." I hung up. Natalie never knew how to lose gracefully. The next day I called my lawyer Marcy, a bulldog in pearls. "She doesn't have a case," Marcy assured me. "You've documented everything. Emails, recordings, statements from the staff, even Rosa's affidavit. You have every right to protect your assets." "It's not just about the money," I said. "I know," she replied. "It's about your name, your voice." That night, I sat down at my desk and opened the leather-bound journal I hadn't touched in years. It was a gift from my late husband, one he inscribed. "For the stories you haven't told yet." I began writing, not to publish, not for revenge, but to remember. To remind myself that I had survived Natalie's cruelty, Adam's blindness, the years of quiet erasure. That I had stood at the edge of loneliness and chosen to rebuild. That I had reclaimed not just my fortune, but my dignity. 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived. Natalie's lawyer had dropped her. Apparently, once they'd seen the full record, screenshots, messages, video clips, no firm wanted to touch her case. She sent one final text to Adam. "Your mother is a monster." He didn't reply. Instead, he forwarded it to me with a simple message. "Not anymore." I printed that and slid it into the back of my journal. Sometimes justice is quiet. Sometimes it's an unanswered message on a cracked phone screen. Sometimes it's the sound of your own name written on documents that no one can take from you. But other times, justice walks barefoot through your kitchen, holding a glass of milk, asking Nana, "Can I sleep in your bed tonight?" And you say yes. Because that's the future Natalie will never touch. Emma had begun calling this house our home. It slipped out one evening while she was setting the table beside Rosa, her small hands fumbling with a cloth napkin. "Our home looks so pretty when the candles are on." Rosa froze for a second. She glanced at me, her face a mixture of surprise and guilt. But I smiled. Because Emma was right. It was her home too. Maybe not legally, but spiritually, emotionally, completely. And that terrified Natalie. After her failed legal stunt, Natalie had tried a different approach. She began sending gifts. A box of expensive chocolates for Emma's sweet tooth. A silk scarf that reminded me of you, Julia. Even a bouquet of white roses, pure, curated, guilt-ridden. I threw them out without a word. Until the day a courier arrived with a letter not typed, but handwritten. That alone startled me. The envelope was cream-colored and unassuming. Rosa opened it, unsure if she should. I let her. She read aloud. I made mistakes. But you didn't have to turn everyone against me. You won, Julia. Isn't that enough? No apology. No ownership. Just a sulking plea disguised as reconciliation. I took the letter and dropped it into the fireplace. Rosa watched it burn with quiet approval. She still doesn't understand, Rosa said. She never will, I replied. Later that week, I received an invitation in the mail. It was for a charity gala, a black tie event that I had once helped organize annually, back when Natalie had first joined the family. She had wormed her way into the social circle through me, using my name, my history, my grace. Now she was trying to rebuild that status without me. But the organizers still remembered who I was, and they'd asked me to speak. I hesitated. Would appearing seem vindictive? Would it stir old gossip? But Rosa was the one who encouraged me. You built your life in silence for everyone else. Maybe it's time you speak for yourself. So I went, wearing an emerald green dress that had once belonged to my mother, hair pinned up in soft waves, pearls from my wedding day around my neck. When I arrived, Natalie was already there. She looked the same, perfect on the surface, hollow underneath. She spotted me before I approached the stage, her expression a strange cocktail of disdain and dread. I stood behind the podium. My hands didn't shake. My name is Julia Grayson, I began, voice even calm. Some of you know me from my work with the Children's Literacy Foundation. Some of you knew my husband, Robert. And some of you knew the woman I used to be. I let the silence settle. But tonight I want to introduce you to the woman I chose to become after betrayal, after silence, after erasure. Gasps flickered across the room like candlelight in wind. I continued, not with gossip, not with venom, but with truth. Truth about women who are forgotten after they outgrow their usefulness. Truth about how wealth is stolen, not with guns, but with manipulation. Truth about how sometimes survival looks like reclaiming your name on a deed. And when I was done, the room rose in applause. Natalie left before dessert. I didn't watch her go. Instead, I walked down from the stage heels, clicking against marble, and into the embrace of a woman who waited with a proud smile and a little girl beside her. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of the past, because I was too full of the future. A week after the gala, the phone rang again. This time it was my son. Hi, Mom. His voice was timid. It had been a long time since we'd spoken on the phone like this. There was a weight in his words, as if he were carrying a guilt too heavy to admit, but too old to ignore. I saw the video, he said. I blinked. Video? Your speech? Someone uploaded it online. It's going viral, I think. I hadn't realized someone had filmed it, nor that it had spread. But apparently, women, older women, had shared it in forums, in support groups, in comment sections that buzzed with heartbreak and vindication. It was beautiful, Mom, Adam said. I didn't know everything. I didn't know she. You didn't want to know, I said softly. There was a long pause. I want to make it right, he whispered. No, I said gently but firmly. You don't get to make it right now. You get to do better if you choose. For Emma, for yourself. But not for me. He didn't argue. Just a quiet, resigned, okay. Before we hung up, he said, I'm proud of you. I know that doesn't mean much now, but I am. And I believed him. Not because he said it, but because he said it too late. That kind of regret is real. Days passed and life took on a new rhythm. Emma was thriving. She read to me in bed now, stumbling over words but always pushing through, her little voice full of pride. Rosa helped me repaint the study. We turned it into a sunroom, more windows, more plants, more life. And then something strange happened. One of Natalie's former friends reached out. Her name was Becca, and she'd always been polite to me, even when Natalie began her campaign to distance the family from old money relics like myself. Becca wanted to apologize. I should have said something, she admitted. We all knew how Natalie talked about you behind your back. I didn't need her apology, but I accepted it. Because unlike Natalie, Becca knew how to say I was wrong. She told me Natalie had moved out of her penthouse, downsizing. Apparently, investors had pulled out. Rumors were swirling. Her reputation was shaky. She's blaming you, Becca added. Says you turned the world against her. She did that herself, I replied. But I was done keeping tabs. My revenge had never been public disgrace or lawsuits. It was living, thriving, laughing with my granddaughter, sitting with Rosa under the new skylight watching the rain dance against the glass. It was having my name on the mailbox again. And then one Sunday morning came the final envelope. No lawyer, no courier, just a letter handwritten in Natalie's looping script. Inside a single sentence. I hope you're happy. I looked at it for a long time. Then I wrote back. I am. Finally. I sealed it, burned it, let it turn to ash. That was the last I ever heard from her. And honestly, I think it was the last thing she ever heard from herself. The summer after Natalie vanished from our lives was the most peaceful season I'd had in decades. I planted rosemary and lavender in the garden where the old pool used to be. Emma and I pressed wildflowers between dictionary pages, and Rosa taught her how to make tortillas from scratch, flour-dusted cheeks and all. The house, my house, was finally filled with warmth, not performance. One Sunday morning, as the dew clung to the edges of the grass, I received a letter from my attorney. It was about the trust. Natalie had tried to contest the inheritance clause through Adam using an outdated version of my will. But she hadn't anticipated one crucial thing. The deed to the house had never been in Adam's name. I had never signed it over, no matter how many times Natalie asked me to consolidate assets. I had listened politely, then quietly walked my will into a second safe deposit box under my maiden name. My lawyer's letter was short. Challenge dismissed. Assets secured. No further action needed. I exhaled. That night, I took out the framed photograph of my late husband and me from our 30th anniversary. I placed it in the living room again for the first time since Natalie removed it for being too old-fashioned. In the image, he held my hand, the way I now held Emma's, fiercely with intention. Later that week, Adam came by. He didn't bring Natalie. He didn't bring flowers or apologies. He brought a drawing Emma had made of our house sunflowers out front, the cat on the windowsill, me in the doorway. It was simple, childlike, and utterly perfect. I hope she's not too angry at me for cutting ties, he said, hesitant. She's angry because she's lost control, I replied. That's not the same as losing love. He nodded. She never loved you the way she should have. She never loved anyone the way she should have, I said. Not even herself? We sat on the porch for an hour, sipping lemonade, talking about nothing and everything. It felt fragile, like handling old glassware, but it also felt like a start. Then one day Emma found the ring. It was in a velvet box tucked behind the books in the study. A simple sapphire set in gold, my wedding ring. Can I wear it when I'm big, like you? She asked. I paused. No, I said gently, but I'll give you something else. Something that's just for you. From the top drawer, I pulled out a tiny locket with a family tree inside. I'd started it years ago, never finished it. Now I added her name in the smallest, most careful cursive. Keep it close, I told her. And remember, it's not just a tree. It's roots. And you, my darling girl, will never be left without them. Emma beamed. Rosa walked in from the kitchen and smiled. This house feels full again. It is, I whispered. But not with noise. With truth. And truth, I had learned, makes the walls hum like music. Summer turned to fall, and with it came a quiet shift in the world. Leaves rustled a little more thoughtfully. The wind carried a different kind of whisper. It was the season where things fell away to make space for what must come next. I had nearly forgotten Natalie's existence until her name appeared again, this time not in a courtroom or email, but on Rosa's phone screen. She had texted Rosa, "Can you ask her if I can talk to her? Just for 5 minutes." Rosa showed me the message without saying a word, her face as still as the kitchen tiles we stood on. I read it once, then again. And then I deleted it. No reply, I said softly. Let her feel the echo. Rosa hesitated. You don't want closure. I already had it, I replied. It came wrapped in silence and self-respect. That week I had the locks changed. Not out of fear, but finality. I didn't want lingering ghosts finding keys to doors that no longer opened for them. But Natalie wasn't done. Oh no! She showed up at the house 2 weeks later, unannounced, uninvited, and somehow still surprised that the gate didn't open for her. I watched her from the second-story window as she rang the bell. She looked smaller, not physically but in presence. Gone was the bold lipstick and high-heeled authority. She wore flats, her makeup barely clinging on her hair pulled back with no effort to impress. I didn't move. I let Rosa handle it. When Rosa opened the door, Natalie smiled too fast. Hi, she began, like it was 2015, and we were still pretending. Rosa was stone. She doesn't want to see you. She's my family. No, Rosa said evenly. You were her lesson. Natalie blinked. Then in a panic, she reached into her bag and pulled out a white envelope. It's a letter, she said quickly. Please, just give it to her. Rosa didn't take it. No letters. No more paper apologies. That woman gave you her trust, her roof, her legacy. You gave her silence when she needed compassion. Natalie's mouth trembled. I made mistakes, she whispered. I want to make it right. You can't make it right here, Rosa replied. You can only leave it behind. Then she closed the door. Not hard, not cruel, just final. Natalie stood there for a few seconds, lost in the emptiness of a life she'd once controlled. Then she turned and walked away. I watched every step, and I felt nothing. No hate, no satisfaction, only confirmation. Later that day, Emma and I baked cookies. She sprinkled cinnamon with an intensity I envied. Why did that lady cry outside? She asked. I paused, then answered gently. Sometimes when people do something very wrong, they cry, not because they're sorry, but because they were caught. Emma nodded as if that made complete sense, and I realized I was raising her now, not just loving her but shaping her. No, Natalie, no damage, just growth. It was my second chance, and I'd be damned if I didn't honor it with everything I had left. Autumn deepened. The golden leaves clung tightly to the trees like whispered promises not quite ready to let go. I found myself leaning into the warmth of routine morning walks with Rosa, laughter with Emma over puzzles, the scent of cinnamon bread filling the kitchen. Life, despite the scars, had begun to feel full. But it was in this calm that the final surprise arrived. A letter, not from Natalie, from her divorce attorney. It came in a beige envelope, thin and clinical, addressed to me directly. Rosa raised her eyebrow when she handed it over, but I opened it with steady hands. Inside, a copy of finalized divorce proceedings and a short handwritten note at the bottom. I've lost everything, except the truth, and now I have to live with that. You don't have to forgive me, but I hope Emma sees the woman I once tried to be. There were no apologies, no excuses, just that line, I've lost everything. And I believed her. From the looks of the legal statements, she had walked away with nothing. My son had filed for full custody. The house she'd once insisted she owned, sold at a loss to pay off the credit card debt she'd hidden behind his back. I didn't rejoice. I didn't laugh. I sat quietly at my writing desk, folded the letter, and tucked it into the back of my journal. Not to remember her, but to remind myself that silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. And truth always arrives, even if late, even if unwanted, like a letter no one expects. That same afternoon, I called my estate attorney. I want to update the will, I said firmly. Take Natalie out completely. Not even a flower. He chuckled softly. Consider it done. And Rosa, I added. Make sure she's protected. The house, the accounts, a stipend. She's earned more than family status. She's earned legacy. Then I hesitated. And Emma, he paused. What about her? I want to create a trust. Education, health, her first home. I want her future safe, no matter what comes. I'll draft the papers. That night, Emma curled up next to me with a book, one I used to read to my son. She didn't ask about her mother, and I didn't mention the letter. Instead, I asked her if she'd like to learn to bake bread from scratch. Her eyes lit up. Can we shape it like a turtle? I laughed. We can shape it like a spaceship if you want. The next morning, I drove to the notary. Alone. I wore my navy wool coat and pinned a silver dragonfly brooch to the collar, a symbol of change, of transformation, of flight. I signed the documents. Emma's future. Rosa's security. My peace. Natalie had been erased not cruelly but completely, like whiteout on a page that no longer needed her paragraph. On the way home, I stopped by the lake, the same place I used to sit when I first arrived in this city decades ago, a woman with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of hope. And now, I had a house filled with life. I had stories. I had a granddaughter who believed the kitchen was magic and that her grandmother could do anything. I sat on the bench letting the sun warm my face. Some people want revenge that explodes. Mine simmered, then quietly changed the will. It was a Saturday morning when I finally opened the old safe in the attic. I hadn't touched it in years, not since the last time my husband and I locked away some keepsakes from our travels, a jade elephant from Thailand, a silk scarf from Florence, and a bundle of sealed letters he'd once written to our son during his college years. The key still hung behind the bookshelf, taped in the crevice of a picture frame. My hands trembled slightly as I fitted it into the rusted lock, not from fear but from the weight of nostalgia. Inside, tucked behind the souvenirs, was the final piece I hadn't yet used. The original deed to the vacation home in Aspen, purchased in my maiden name long before my marriage. My husband had always insisted, "Keep something that's only yours, just in case." At the time, I thought it pessimistic. Now I saw it for what it was. Preparation wrapped in love. Natalie never knew about this property. It wasn't mentioned in the family trust. It wasn't in any shared accounts. It was pristine, private, and paid off. I scanned the document again. Still valid. Still mine. I made a call to the estate attorney. "I'd like to add this property to the trust for Emma," I said. "But not right away. I want her to receive it when she's 25. When she's old enough to know the value of silence and of space." He understood immediately. "Shall we title it as the Heart House?" he asked. I smiled. "Yes, but don't tell her yet." Later that afternoon, I baked rosemary bread with Emma while Rosa prepped tea. Emma leaned her head against my shoulder, watching the dough rise. "Grandma, do you ever get sad that Mom doesn't come around anymore?" I paused. The air smelled like thyme and yeast. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But sometimes the people who disappear make room for others to shine." She thought about it, then nodded. "Like Rosa. Exactly like Rosa." Then she added, "You know what I want to be when I grow up?" "What's that?" "Someone who never makes Grandma feel invisible." That night, I walked out onto the porch with a cup of chamomile tea and watched the sun dip behind the trees. The world felt quieter now. Not empty, just finally settled. Natalie had become a shadow of her former self, disgraced in the eyes of the family, divorced, isolated. But not once had I spoken a cruel word against her in public. I didn't need to. I had moved past her into a new chapter, a new rhythm, a future she couldn't touch. At dinner the next evening, I sat at the head of the table not out of demand, but because Emma had pulled the chair out and said, "This one's for Grandma." There was no performance, no spectacle, just presence, recognition. In the end, that's all any of us ever want. Not revenge, not power. Just to be seen, and for those who ignore us in our weakest moments, they don't deserve a place in our strongest ones. A few days after updating Emma's trust with the Aspen home, I received an invitation in the mail. It was from Natalie, a pale envelope, no return address. The handwriting was careful, almost forced, as if she debated every letter before pressing ink to paper. Inside, a folded piece of cream stationery. No salutation, no pleasantries. "I heard about the trust, about the will. I won't ask for forgiveness because I know it's not mine to ask anymore. But Emma, she still asks about me. I'm trying. I'm in therapy. I'm working. If you ever see a path back for her from me, I'd be grateful." No signature. Just a blank line where her name should be. I read it twice, then a third time. Then I tore it in half. Not out of malice, but because it was too little too late, and far too convenient. Actions had weight. Natalie's had crushed trust, family, and dignity under heel. A single page wouldn't rebuild that bridge. Not after what she'd done during my illness. Not after the way she dismissed me in the very home I built. But Emma deserved better than cold finality, so I didn't throw it away. I tucked it in a drawer marked later. Maybe one day Emma would want to see it. Not for reconciliation, but for understanding. The following Sunday, I took Emma to the orchard. We picked apples, climbed low-hanging limbs, and shared cinnamon cider on a wooden bench under a cloudless sky. Rosa snapped photos, Emma with juice on her chin, me with laugh lines I was no longer ashamed of. Afterward, we stopped at the town library. I donated a box of books, all with handwritten notes on the inside cover. For the next curious girl. That night, I wrote in my journal, "There's a quiet joy in reclaiming space, in not needing applause to affirm your worth, in teaching by example, in knowing your silence was not weakness but wind-gathering force." Natalie's betrayal had taken something from me, yes, but it also gave me clarity, the kind that only pain delivers, the kind that shows you who stands beside you when your hands tremble, and who reaches for the check instead of your pulse. And yet the greatest twist in all of this, I didn't become cruel. I became clear. I didn't weaponize my fortune out of vengeance. I used it like a compass to redirect the legacy to point toward the future I actually wanted for Emma. One of warmth. One of dignity. One where women like me silenced, overlooked, sidelined, took back the pen and rewrote the ending. Rosa came to sit beside me. She didn't ask what I was writing. She just handed me a slice of warm pie and said, "Tomorrow's your birthday. What do you want?" I smiled. Nothing bought. Just honesty and laughter. And maybe a family who understands what it means when a woman stands back up. She nodded. "Then you've already got your gift." I looked at her then out the window, where Emma was placing candles on a cake she'd made herself. I had everything I needed. And the person who once dismissed me from my own home now paid rent. Poetic, yes, but more than that, just. My birthday arrived quietly, just the way I liked it. There were no lavish celebrations, no grand gestures. Just the gentle sound of eggs sizzling in a pan, the clink of coffee mugs on a kitchen counter, and the scent of cinnamon wafting through the air. Emma had woken up early to surprise me with breakfast, her little fingers wrapped around a tray that wobbled with determination. Toast, scrambled eggs, a glass of orange juice slightly too full. She beamed with pride. "Happy birthday, Grandma," she whispered, as though it were a secret just between us. It was the best gift I'd ever received. Later that day, Rosa drove us to the courthouse not for a legal battle, but for a ceremony. Emma had drawn a picture of the day I left the hospital, she called it, when Grandma got strong again. We'd submitted it to the county art contest and she'd won a ribbon. The woman who once watched me cry behind a locked bathroom door now stood next to me, holding Emma's hand, watching her beam with joy under the rotunda's dome. There was poetry in that. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I sat on the back porch with a warm shawl draped over my shoulders. Rosa joined me with 2 glasses of wine, one red, one white. "I didn't know which you preferred," she said. I smiled. "Depends on the day, but today, white." She clinked her glass against mine and we sipped in silence. It was then I told her, "I rewrote my will last week," I said gently. Emma's set. "You're included too, for everything." She didn't cry, not like I did when Natalie tossed my medication into a drawer and said she was too busy. She just nodded, one tear sliding down her cheek. "You didn't have to," she whispered. "I know," I replied. "But you did." The front door creaked open. Emma peeked out. "Grandma, I saved you the biggest slice." Of course she did. I stood slowly, joints groaning their usual complaint, and followed her inside. The living room was filled with soft music, flickering candles, and framed photos we'd taken all year. Moments of rebuilding, of remembering, of reclaiming. On the mantel among the photos was a single note. "Your presence made this house a home, and your courage made it a fortress." Rosa had written it. The years I thought were stolen from me were being returned one kind gesture at a time. And Natalie. Well, she still paid her rent monthly on time. She asked to visit once, but I declined. Not out of bitterness, out of boundaries. Forgiveness, I had learned, was not always an invitation back. Sometimes it was a closing of the book with gratitude that you now knew how the story should end. And as for me, I was no longer the woman waiting to be seen. I was the author now. And I had written myself back into the narrative not as a victim, but as a guide. A lighthouse for the quiet ones, the overgivers, the ones mistaken for weak just because they loved too much for too long. And when I blew out the candle on my birthday cake, I didn't wish for revenge. I wished for more days like this, where I am seen, heard, held, and never again ignored. In the aftermath of betrayal, it's easy to want vengeance, to scorch the earth and salt the remains. But what I've learned, what I hope you take from my story, is that dignity is a deeper fire. It doesn't shout. It simply burns longer. Natalie's disregard didn't just wound me. It redefined the lines of inheritance, of loyalty, of consequence. In trying to erase me, she drew attention to everything I had quietly built. A home, a family, a foundation of generosity. She thought power came from control. I knew better. Power lives in knowing your worth and never shrinking to be tolerated. Rosa taught me that good family isn't always bound by blood. And Emma, with her fierce little hugs and shy drawings, reminded me that love, when chosen freely, is the greatest legacy. I kept my silence for too long, but when I finally spoke, I did it through action. Through legal lines and locked doors and one single phrase on a title deed. Owner, Helen Thatcher. That $50 million fortune. It isn't just about money. It's about what you leave behind when the world tries to erase you. I left my truth, my boundary, my voice, and it echoes still, because grace has sharp edges too.